God, on what might be a morning where we're more tired than usual, we ask that you revive us with your Spirit who speaks to us through the word, that we might understand your ways, and we might understand how you're also calling and guiding us as you called and guided your people of old. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So we are in our second session with the prophet Elisha. Wait a second. Wait. Okay. So with regard to the rise of Elijah, we saw how Yahweh chose Elijah to be Elijah's prophetic successor. Wait a second. I think I got the wrong one. No, I didn't. Okay. We're good. I know what I'm doing. So Elijah, or Yahweh, chose Elisha to be Elijah's prophetic successor. As was the case with Elijah, Elisha is armed with Yahweh's word. Elisha has power for both life and death. And that's where we saw in that little story with the boys taunting Elisha as Baldy, where he cursed them. 2 she-bears came and killed 42 of the boys. So you want to think twice how you respond to Elisha. We ended on starting out with 2 Kings 4, where there again 5 miracle stories are being told, and they center on Elisha as the one through whom hopeless situations can be turned into life-giving or life-affirming situations. So we picked it up where you had the woman who was a widow. She had 2 children. Her husband had a significant debt, and she had no means to pay it. So her children are going to be sold into slavery. So she goes to Elisha, asks for help. Elisha says, go home, get every kind of vessel you can, fill it with oil. And the more vessels they got, the more oil they had to fill till there were no more vessels in the village. And so she had enough oil that she could sell it with the profits, pay off the debt, and then she could live on it. And then we have the story of the Shunamite woman, who is very gracious, offers generous hospitality to Elisha, provides him food, provides him room and board, essentially. And Elisha found out that she did not have any children. Her husband was old. So Elisha said, at this season next year, you will have a son. She thinks that he's kind of taunting with her, but by golly, the next year she has a son. So we're going to pick it up right there. The son dies. Okay, we heard that. He was sitting in her lap. The son dies, but the woman knows Elisha is the one through whom life can work. So she goes right to Elisha. She tells Elisha what happens, or Elisha perceives what's happened. So here's where we'll pick up the story. Elisha said to Gehazi, Gehazi is his assistant, gird up your loins, take my staff in your hand and go. If you meet anyone, give no greeting. If anyone greets you, don't answer. Lay my staff on the face of the child. Then the mother of the child said, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave without you. So Elisha rose up and followed her. Gehazi went on ahead, laid the staff on the face of the child, but there was no sound or sign of life. He came back to meet Elisha and told him the child has not awakened. So though Elijah is never told that the woman's son has died, he perceives it, and so he sends Gehazi on ahead with 2 instructions. Then he follows with the woman. Now note how the woman, she's sticking with Elijah because she perceives that life is worked through Elisha. So she says, I'm not leaving without you. So Gehazi hurries on, goes ahead. Elisha and the woman follow. So Elisha's instructions to Gehazi: don't get waylaid by anyone. And then he says, put Elisha's staff on the child's face. And we don't know all the details of it. It sounds like Elisha is wondering if his staff is a curative instrument, that somehow through his staff, the child might be healed. When Elisha and the mother arrive on the scene, the news that Gehazi delivers is not good. Laying the staff of Elisha on the child's face has no positive effect. Her son is dead. So the scene seems completely hopeless. When Elisha came into the house, he saw the child lying dead on his bed. So he went in and closed the door on the 2 of them and prayed to Yahweh. Then he got up on the bed and lay upon the child, putting his mouth upon his mouth, his eyes upon his eyes, his hands upon his hands. And while he lay bent over him, the flesh of the child became warm. Elisha got down, walked once to and fro in the world, then got up again and bent over him. The child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. Elisha summoned Gehazi and said, call the Shunamite woman. So he called her, and when she came to Elisha, he said, take your son. She came and fell at his feet, bowing to the ground. Then she took her son and left. So after praying to Yahweh, Elisha becomes the personal vehicle for restoring the boy's life and returning him to his mother. And this woman again shows this great respect for Elisha by bowing down at his feet, a way to honor him. When Elisha returned to Gilgal, there was a famine in the land. As the company of prophets was sitting before him, he said to his servant, put the large pot on and make some stew for the company of the prophets. One of them went into the field to gather herbs. He found a wild vine and gathered from it a lapful of wild gourds. And they came and cut them up into the pot of stew, not knowing what they were. They served some for the men to eat. But while they were eating the stew, they cried out, "O man of God, there's death in the pot." They could not eat it. He said to them, "Bring some flour." Elisha threw it into the pot and said, "Serve the people and let them eat." And there was nothing harmful in the pot. So while this episode lacks the depth and the poignancy of that previous episode with the Shunamite woman, once again, Elisha is the instrument of life in the face of famine and poisoned food. So Elisha can make that which can lead to death, he turns it into life. So God is at work in him in powerful ways. And then our fifth story of death situations turning into life situations in chapter 4. A man came from Baal Shalisha, bringing food from the first fruits to the man of God, 20 loaves of barley and fresh ears of grain in his sack. Elisha said, "Give it to the people and let them eat." But his servant said, how can I set this before 100 people? So Elisha repeated, give it to the people and let them eat. For thus says Yahweh, they shall eat and have some left. He set it before them. They ate and had some left according to the word of Yahweh. So as previously noted, the fifth legend, like the first, focuses on abundance in the midst of scarcity. So the man's gift of first fruits would seem to be a gesture honoring Elisha, whereas Elisha uses it as a vehicle of sustenance for the sake of others. So whereas Gehazi, his servant, focuses on what can't possibly happen, Elisha focuses on the word of Yahweh, which makes all things possible. So once again, in the face of situations of cannot, insurmountable debt, the first story, barrenness, the second story, death, the third story, famine and poison, the fourth story, hunger, the fifth story, Elisha is Yahweh's trusting vehicle of can. So through Elisha, alternative futures are possible. And you can also hear in this story, it's the makings of Jesus' feeding miracles. That you got hungry people, you've got not nearly enough food, and the disciples will say exactly what Gehazi says, how can we set this before so many people? Only with Elisha, it's 100 people. In the Gospels, it's 5,000 in one of the feeding miracles. It's 5,000, not counting the women and children. So you start seeing there's in some of the Elijah and Elisha stories, you have the forerunners of Jesus' own ministry of what can't happen is possible, that through Jesus, alternate futures are available. Now we're coming to 2 Kings 5. 2 Kings 5 is the longest story in the Elisha cycle. It's one of the most artful stories in the Old Testament. It's one of my favorite stories. It tells two interrelated miracle stories. I say miracle. One is going to be very, very, very positive, and one is going to be very, very negative. Because again, the power of Elisha can be for life, or it can mean for curse. Within the two miracle stories, there are a series of significant contrasts between the characters. So really, we want to highlight that because this is such artful storytelling that characters are contrasted with each other in significant ways. At the center of the story, of course, is Elijah, who has the power to produce blessings. That will be the positive miracle, and the power to produce curse, the negative. So the scene is set, the beginning. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man and in high favor with his master, because by him Yahweh had given victory to Aram. The man, though a mighty warrior, suffered from leprosy. Now the Arameans on one of their raids had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, if only my Lord were with the prophet who's in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. So Naaman went in and told his Lord just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, go then, and I'll send along a letter to the king of Israel. So first we want to get our geography. So Aram is modern day Syria, and the capital of Aram is Damascus. Israel has its capital Samaria. So Nahum is a servant of the king of Aram up in the north. The girl who's been taken captive from Israel says there's the prophet in Samaria. That's the capital of Israel. So the characterizations at this opening. Nahum is depicted as a person having very high status. He's the commander of the army of Israel's enemy, the Arameans. Back in 1 Kings 20 and 1 Kings 22, we heard about the conflicts that Aram and Israel have. So right away, wait a second, he's the commander of the enemy. He's a great man. He's in favor with the king of Aram, his master. And evidently he has some favor with Yahweh, because Yahweh had given victory to the Arameans through Naaman. Now, notice sometimes what the Bible doesn't say. It doesn't say who the victory was over. Did Yahweh give Nahum and the Arameans victory over Israel? Was that in punishment to King Ahab and his house, or was it some other enemies? Bible doesn't worry about that at this point. So Nahum, while he has really high status, so there's even going to be contrast within his character, he has two significant problems. First, he has leprosy. That puts him on the outskirts or the margins of society. Second, he lacks any type of information regarding how he might find healing from his leprosy. Now, notice even within these verses, the contrast between Nahum, high status, powerful figure, and the young Israelite girl. Her age, her gender, and the fact that she's essentially a prisoner of war in a foreign country puts her on the lowest rung on the social scale in Armenian society. But she is the one who has both faith and information. She knows about the prophet who's in Samaria, and she believes that he could cure Naaman. So Naaman's on the top of the social scale, no information, leprosy. The young girl, bottom of the social scale, she's got faith and she's got the information that Nahum needs. So Nahum takes the information the young captive Israelite girl provides, and now he delivers it to his master, the king of Aram, who decides to communicate with the king of Israel. So now we're going to have king communicating with king. Again, the high and the mighty are communicating with each other. Nahum went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 60,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of garments. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he's trying to pick a fight with me." So what's going on here? The gifts that Naaman takes with him, they're gifts, but they could also be payment for ever will cure him. But those gifts are an enormous value. Essentially, he's taking millions of dollars in gold and silver. Again, it shows Naaman has access to royal riches. Only royalty would have access to that much money in their treasury. It also shows how much Naaman seeks to be healed. So he takes this huge amount that's beyond the means of anybody except someone connected to the royal house. Now, notice something about the two kings here. Both the king of Aram and the king of Israel are totally clueless to the meaning of what the young captive Israelite girl clearly understood. She understands where Naaman can find healing. The two kings, they don't understand at all. The king of Aram thinks that the king of Israel has the power to cure Naaman. The king of Israel knows that he's completely powerless to help Naaman. Instead, he thinks the letter is a trick by which the king of Aram will attack him when he's unable to cure Naaman as he's asked to do. So the king of Israel, show you how clueless he is. Remember what the young Israelite girl said. The prophet in Samaria. Samaria at that time is not a country or a region, it's the city, the capital city. Where does the king of Israel live? In the capital city. The prophet's right there, but he's clueless as to the prophet and the prophet's ability. So he thinks he's been set up, that the king of Aram sends him this letter, cure this man that I'm sending you. But when he can't cure him, the king of Aram, he thinks, will be angry and will attack him. So neither king have a clue, for all their power, yet don't have a clue of what's going on, where the little captive young Israelite girl did. So he tears his clothes. That's a sign of grief, because he thinks the king of Aram has put him in an impossible situation. He can't cure Naaman. He doesn't have the power. So he's going to tick off the king of Aram, and then he's going to get attacked. But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king. Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, that he may learn that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots, halted at the entrance of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a message to him saying, go, wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. Now, on the one hand, Naaman's powerful status continues to be emphasized in the story. As he goes to Elisha's house, he has an entourage of horsemen and charioteers. So he's not coming really with his hat in his hand. On the other hand, Elisha knows that by curing Naaman, he'll prove to Naaman that there is a prophet in Israel. Something that neither Naaman nor the king of Aram nor the king of Israel knew at this point. So Elisha is ready to do the curing as proof of God's prophet being in Israel. But Elisha is so unimpressed by Naaman's powerful status, he doesn't even bother to meet him face to face. Instead, he sends a messenger with instructions for Naaman: wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River, in order to be healed. And to be healed would mean that he's made clean and he's restored to society. So Elisha is quite willing to do the miracle, but he's doing it less for the sake of Nahum, more for the sake of Yahweh. Nahum is really ticked off by this. Naaman became angry and went away saying, I thought for me, he'd surely come out and stand and call on the name of his God, Yahweh, his God, and would wave his hand over the spot and cure the leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could not I wash in them and be clean? He turned and went away in rage. So Naaman, who's gone to great lengths to be cured, he's gone to his king, he's tapped into the royal treasury, he's got his entourage, goes to the king of Israel, then goes to Elisha. He isn't comforted by Elisha's simple instructions to cure the leprosy. I mean, just go immerse yourself 7 times in Jordan. Instead, he responds with egotistical rage, religious rage, and ethnic rage. The egotistical rage. Elisha should have come out to meet Naaman because of his high status. I mean, if Governor Ricketts comes to First Lutheran Church and is standing out in the parking lot, he expects us to go out to him to welcome him in and show him into the church as a matter of honor and respect for his high status. Elijah doesn't even bother to go even meet Naaman. So Naaman's ego is offended. Religious rage. Naaman thinks Elisha should have put on a much more elaborate religious show as part of the healing ritual. In fact, Elisha didn't even directly involve Yahweh, for God's sake. So Naaman thinks, oh, he should come out, he should wave his hands, call upon my God, do these things. No, Elijah doesn't come out. Elijah doesn't put on a religious show at all. And then there's the ethnic rage. Naaman figures the rivers of Aram's capital are better than all the water in Israel. So he could have stayed in his own homeland and washed in those rivers and be healed. He's gone to all this trouble. He didn't come out to meet me. He didn't do all these religious cantations, and my waters are better than his waters. So in rejecting Elisha's very simple directive, wash 7 times in the Jordan, be cured, Naaman is rejecting both Elisha as a prophet, and he's also rejecting the cure he's gone to such great lengths to receive. So his ego has really gotten in the way. But his servants approached and said to him, Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? How much more when all he said was wash and be clean? So Naaman went down and immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. His flesh was restored like the flesh of a young boy, and he was clean. So once again in the story, those of lower status know much better than someone of high status. The servants know more than Naaman. So the servants recognize Elisha is a prophet even before Naaman is cured, whereas Elijah thought that Naaman would recognize him as a prophet after he was cured. Those of lower status, the servants, convince Nahum, their master, to do what Elisha said, precisely because it's so simple. Where Naaman thought Elisha's instructions were too simple, his servants say, it's just so simple. Just go and wash, and he's cured. So Naaman does take the sage advice of his servants. Naaman immerses himself in the Jordan as Elisha, the man of God, instructed, and he's healed. He's made clean. Now, this is a great line. The great and powerful nation, Naaman, is akin to the young girl in that now he had the skin of a young boy. It's the exact same word in Hebrew. So we were introduced to this young Israelite girl, lowest on the rung of society. She's a captive of war. But now Naaman has the skin of a young boy. So there's a neat contrast. Then Naaman returned to the man of God, he and all his company. He came and stood before Elisha and said, now that I know there is no God in all the earth except in Israel, please take a blessing from your servant. But Elisha said, as Yahweh lives, before whom I stand, I'll take nothing. Naaman urged him to accept, but Elisha refused. Then Naaman said, if not, please let 2 mule loads of earth be given to your servant. For your servant will no longer offer burnt offerings or sacrifices to any god except Yahweh. But may Yahweh pardon your servant on one account. When my master goes into the house of Ramon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow down in the house of Ramon, when I do bow down in the house of Ramon, may Yahweh pardon your servant on this one account. Elisha said to him, go in shalom. So because he's been healed through Elisha, Naaman's entire outlook goes through significant changes. Instead of being headstrong, Naaman is grateful, he's gracious, and he's generous. He acknowledges Elisha as his superior. So 5 times he describes himself as Elisha's servant. You know, your servant, your servant, your servant, your servant, your servant. He confesses the exclusive divinity of Israel's God. As Naaman stands before Elisha, he wants to bestow a material blessing upon Elisha. And that, we call that great treasure, royal treasure he's packing. But because Elisha stands before Yahweh, you see that wonderful contrast of standing? Because Elisha stands before Yahweh, he'll accept nothing from Naaman. In other words, he's not a prophet for hire. He works exclusively for Yahweh. Naaman then makes 2 theological requests of Elisha. The first one, please let 2 mule loads of earth be given to your servant. So he wants 2 mule loads of Israelite soil. Why? He's thinking that Yahweh is somehow confined to Israel. He's confined to the actual turf. Because notice he says there's no God except in Israel. So he wants Israelite dirt because he thinks God, Yahweh, is confined to the actual turf or the land. He thinks Yahweh can't go beyond the barrier of Israel. So he's going to take like Yahweh's turf with him. previously, Naaman didn't think the water of Israel, all the waters of Israel, equaled 2 rivers in Aram. And now he thinks the dirt in Israel that's where the power of Yahweh is. His second theological conclusion, he says he won't sacrifice to any God except Yahweh, but he's going to have to participate in the royal cult of Ramon. That's the Aramean god of storms. So he's saying Yahweh shouldn't take it personal when I have to go in with the king. Okay. So in other words, I got to go to my boss's church, but hopefully Yahweh will understand. It's nothing personal. It's just business. And what's interesting, while Elijah is dead set against idolatry, just like Elijah was, he understands the requirements of Naaman's job. So he bids him to go in shalom, go in peace. In other words, Elijah said, it's cool, Naaman, I get it. You got to do your job. You got to go with the king into the king's house of worship. So it seems like the story of Naaman and Elisha ends happily ever after. Naaman is cured. He now recognizes that there's a prophet in Israel. There's no God except Yahweh. He's only going to offer burnt offerings to Yahweh. Everything seems, it's just fine. The story's over. Instead, the story will now take a completely unexpected turn. But when Naaman had gone from him a short distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elijah, the man of God, thought, my master has let that Aramean Naaman off too lightly by not taking from Naaman what he offered. As Yahweh lives, I'll run after him and take something from Naaman. So Gehazi went after Naaman. When Naaman saw someone running after him, he jumped down from the chariot to meet him and said, is it shalom? Gehazi replied, yes. But my master has sent me to say to you, 2 members of a company of prophets had just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing. Excuse me. The story gives us a new piece of information. Elisha's servant Gehazi was there when Naaman returned and to offer Elisha a material blessing. What Elisha refused to do, take something from Naaman, and that's, he says, I will take nothing from you. Gehazi is determined to do it. Gehazi is determined to take from Naaman. So using the same words in very different ways. Elisha, I will take nothing from you. Gehazi, I'm going to take from Naaman because my master didn't. Part of Elisha's refusal included an oath. He says, Elisha said, as Yahweh lives, I will take nothing from you. Now, part of Gehazi's plan includes that very oath. As Yahweh lives, I'll take something from Naaman. So when Naaman was departing, Elisha bid him shalom, go in shalom. Now, when Gehazi is arriving, Naaman inquires about shalom. Is it shalom? Gehazi plans to take something from Naaman involves lying to Naaman about a supposed message Elisha sent to him to deliver to Naaman regarding the 2 visiting prophets, a talent of silver, and 2 changes of gold or of clothing. And a talent of silver, again, we're talking over $1 million in value. Naaman said, please take 2 talents. Naaman begged Gehazi and tied up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of clothing, gave them to 2 of his servants who carried them in front of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the citadel, he took the bags from them, stored them inside. He dismissed the men, and they left. Whereas Gehazi, an Israelite, is greedy and deceptive, Naaman, an Aramean, is gracious and generous. He begs Gehazi to take twice the amount of what Gehazi asked in his lie. So Gehazi is asking for like $1 million. Naaman says, no. How about 2 million? You want 2 million? He even provides 2 of his servants to carry the talents and the change of clothes for Gehazi. So Naaman is very different than he was earlier in the story. He's undergone such a significant change because Elisha has cured him. So Gehazi, Elisha's servant, stashes his ill-gotten gains and dismisses Naaman's servants. Gehazi went in and stood before his master, and Elisha said to him, where have you been, Gehazi? And he answered, your servant hasn't gone anywhere at all. But Elisha said to him, did not I go with you in spirit when someone left his chariot to meet you? Is this a time to take money and to take clothing, olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen and male and female slaves? Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and your descendants forever. So Gehazi left Elisha's presence leprous, as white as snow. So Gehazi continues his deceptive plan by lying to Elisha about where he has or hasn't been. And those of you that have children, you know exactly what's that. Where have you been with the car? I didn't take the car. It just happened to lose a quarter of a tank of gas. Elisha's spirit, which remember from last week, it's twice Elijah's spirit. Elisha's spirit has allowed him to accompany Gehazi and to uncover what Gehazi is trying to cover up. Elisha didn't have to be with Naaman for him to be healed. Okay, so remember, Elisha didn't even go out the house. He sent a message. And Naaman is cured when he dips himself 7 times in the Jordan. Elisha wasn't there. Well, Elijah doesn't have to be there with Gehazi to know about Gehazi's deception. Elisha not only lists what Gehazi took, take money, take clothing, he also lists what Gehazi can buy or procure with the vast amounts of his ill-gotten gains. He can get olive orchards, he can get vineyards, sheep, oxen, male and female slaves. So as an act of retributive justice, Elisha pronounces the sentence, the leprosy that left Naaman will cling to Gehazi and his descendants forever. Kind of a tit for tat. So Naaman's obedience to Elisha's prophetic word resulted in him being cured of leprosy, whereas Gehazi's deceptive use of Elisha's prophetic word results in him being struck with leprosy. Whereas Naaman returned to Elisha with skin like a young boy, Gehazi departs from Elijah with skin as white as snow. And that's not a good thing. Whereas Naaman wanted to give a blessing to Elisha, which he refused, now Elijah has pronounced a curse against Gehazi, which he's powerless to refuse. Whereas from the time of the young Israelite girl's disclosure that there was a possibility that Naaman could be healed by Elisha, there is no chance for Gehazi or his descendants, because they're going to be lepers forever. So just some connections. The word of the prophet can be life-giving, or it can produce a curse. Naaman's faith isn't a precondition for his being healed by being immersed into water. Rather, his being healed by being immersed in water empowers his faith. Okay, so it's not Naaman's faith that gets him cured. It's the powerful word of Elisha. But being cured produces faith for Naaman. So in this way, Naaman's experience will become the experience of every baptized believer. Okay? For us as Lutherans, faith is not a precondition for baptism. Rather, we believe baptism as a sacrament has the power to produce, to create faith, because it's the water and the word. It's not the water, it's the water and the word. Well, with Naaman's being cured, it was the water and the word of the prophet. Yahweh is the God in Israel and of Israel, but Israel is not the exclusive people of God. As Naaman the foreigner receives Yahweh's healing power and becomes a believer or a worshiper of Yahweh. See, that becomes very important. Yes, Yahweh is the God of Israel, but he's not, Yahweh isn't confined to Israel. This gets picked up along with Elijah's being sent to the Zarephath widow. Jesus picks up the theological truth regarding Naaman in what Jesus tells the people in his hometown synagogue. This is the gospel lesson back in January, where Jesus is in his hometown synagogue. He reads from Isaiah 61, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He's anointed me to preach good news, release to the poor, release the captives. And all the people are amazed at the words of grace that come out of Jesus' mouth. And then Jesus says, no doubt you will quote me this proverb, physician, heal yourself. In other words, charity begins at home. And Jesus refers to, there were many widows at the time of Elijah, but Elijah was only sent to the widow at Zarephath. And then Jesus says, and at the time of Elisha, there were many lepers, but none of them were cured except Naaman, the foreigner. So God is not confined to the people of God. Oh, God can work beyond Christianity. Holy smokes. claim is right here in the Old Testament. Jesus picks that claim up and carries it on too, not confined. Just like if you haven't been to church, you'll hear this in the sermon. So you can say, screw it, I don't have to go to church now. Abraham believed, and God reckoned it to him as righteousness. Paul picks that line up to show that God is bigger than Judaism, that Gentiles are also the children of God, because the key for Abraham, he believed and God reckoned it to him as righteousness. And he'll go on, that was before Abraham was circumcised. So God is always bigger than the people of God. Let's see. 2 Kings 6 through 8. These chapters contain a number of stories which highlight both the word of Elisha and the power which is at work through him. Some of the stories are local and quaint, while some of the stories take place on the international scene and are much more complex. I'm going to show you a local quaint one, and that's where we'll end. The so-called miracle stories involving Elijah continue to have the same basic structure, 3 steps. There's a problem, which is called to the attention of Elisha. Elisha responds to the request. There's a miraculous occurrence which solves the problem. And you could just think of the story of Nahum. The problem, Nahum has leprosy. The king of Aram thinks that the king of Israel can heal him. King of Israel knows he can't heal him, so tears his clothes because he thinks, I'm going to get into a war now. That's the problem. Elisha responds to the request. Hey, don't tear your clothes. Send them to me. Naaman, go wash in the Jordan 7 times, you'll be healed. And then the miraculous occurrence, which solves the problem. Nahum dips himself 7 times, he's cured. Now, as artful as the story of Naaman is, the first miracle story in this cycle is more than a bit strange. So let's look at this strange story and we'll end it there. So chapter 6, verses 1 to 7 to 2 Kings. Now, the company of prophets said to Elisha, as you see, the place where we live under your charge is too small for us. Let us go to the Jordan and let us collect logs there, 1 for each of us, and build a place there for us to live. He answered, do so. Then one of them said, please come with your servants. And Elisha answered, I will. So he went with them. When they came to the Jordan, they cut down trees. But as one of them was felling a log, his axe head fell into the water. And he cried out, alas, master, it was borrowed. Then the man of God said, where did it fall? And when he showed him the place, Elisha cut off a stick, threw it in there, and iron floated up. Elisha said, pick it up. So he reached out his hand and took it. So this is the quaint local story and the strange story. So central problem, an iron axe head falls into the Jordan River. Now, iron is very expensive at that time, and the axe is borrowed. So the member of the company of the prophets who borrowed it is in deep trouble. Elisha's response, he throws a stick into the place in the river where the axe head fell and sunk. And we're to remember, Elisha has already demonstrated power over the water of the Jordan River, because remember, he used Elijah's mantle to part the waters of the Jordan. The miraculous occurrence, the iron axe head floats up so the man can retrieve it. So through the prophet Elisha, that which is always impossible now becomes a genuine possibility, especially as it helps one who is otherwise in deep trouble. It's like you borrow someone's car, someone's Mercedes, and you get it dented. And so you go to Elisha as the repair shop. I told you, it's a quaint local little story. I got nothing brilliant to say about it. I would never want to have to preach on this story. Just say, So that's where we'll leave it. On the local quaint. I mean, remember, I didn't write this stuff, okay? Thank you all. And we'll have one more session then next week.